welcome everybody. I think we can start. I'll just make a sort of a few introductory sort of comments. As you said, we're one speaker short at the moment, but we can rejig the program if we have to catch up. So thank you for the introduction. So I'm Ben Taylor, part of the organizing group. A number of you know me from various different things, and we've done them together in the past. And actually, it's really this panel is an interesting topic, and everybody speaking on it is somebody I've worked with in some guise over the past. So this is the wonder of these connections conferences. You bring all sorts of people you know, you bring them together, and you see what they think, what they know. We did also see, to say as a sort of a background remark, there was some text chat about the weather and the conditions. I actually, whilst that was going on, I ran upstairs and took a picture out of my front door. So this actually backdrop is actually what's outside my house right now. Minus 11 degrees, pile of snow on the ground. So for those who want to come to Connections North, when it comes back to being a physical face-to-face meeting in Montreal, possibly Ottawa in the future year, then this is what you'll come and see, and please do come and enjoy it. But it can be I think the British term here that I would have used in my youth is bracing. But as I said, I've now learned that anything better than -10 negative is actually mild. So it's a borderline mild conditions, bright and sunny, lovely day in Ottawa, and welcome to everybody. So onto our subject. We talked. We had an interesting debate about the title for this topic. Somebody who remained nameless thought we could call this Un-American Gaming. We thought that might be confusing and unfortunate, because it might be confused with anti-American gaming. There was a fear that there would be angry terrorist militias charging over the border and trying to ransack the campus of McGill University. So we decided to avoid any complications with such names and call it wargaming in smaller defense communities. So the background to this really is recognizing that the scale of resources, the scale of effort, the size of the teams available in different organizations, different countries is really quite different. It is jokingly said, and possibly true, that there are more United States Defense Department related wargaming institutions than there are Canadian Defense Department wargamers. So there's a sort of order of magnitude difference in the scale of our resources. That means that inherently we have to work differently. We have to do different sorts of things and do them in different sorts of ways. So the idea behind this panel is to bring together representatives from a number of different organizations to talk about how they view the way they wargame at the scale at which they need to operate. Clearly, many of us attend Connections events or other interactions with United States organizations, and we see the presentations of fascinating, detailed games that are being designed and run. We had an excellent keynote presentation showcasing one example of this yesterday afternoon. But we come back and saying, well, that's like 100 years of our budget blown in 6 weeks. We can't do that. We need to do something a little bit different. What does smaller look like? And is smaller still credible? Is smaller still useful? Yeah, we would sort of posit that those are definitely they are. What does it look like? And how do we take the books and the manuals and the presentations and implement wargaming for our purposes in our particular organizations? So that's the genesis of this topic. We've killed 5 minutes of our head start, but sort of in introducing that. But we're now going to sort of move forward, and we have presentations from the Netherlands, from Germany. We hope our German presenter is missing. From NATO, and another member of the Canadian team is going to sort of talk about this particular question from his perspective as well. So hopefully there'll be some interesting different perspectives, and I'm looking forward to a rich little conversation and questions afterwards as we see how we each tackle this. So now we'll move to David Redpath. David is a close colleague of Scott Roach, who spoke yesterday. In fact, appeared, I think, in some of the slides there. David, if you would like to open up, I think you have slides ready to go.
I do, and here we go. And let me just check to see if you can see those all right.
I can see them.
Excellent, no problem. So thank you very much, David Redpath. Normal disclaimers go on here. This is my opinion, not the opinion of the Canadian Joint Operations Command or the Joint Warfare Centre. And for those of you whose Latin is a little bit rusty, the Latin title there is Discovery and Innovation, which is our unit motto. When Ben said, small country wargaming or small things, I thought, hang on, Canada's the largest democratic country in the world. We're not a small country, but in terms of wargaming capability, we are. So I'm going to try and run through some ideas about how, to a certain extent, our ethos is within the wargaming capability that we have here in Canada. Ben's list of stuff was, what do we do? Which games do we run? And I think Scott answered almost all of those yesterday for Canada. So I'm not going to do any of that. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to give you a brief which says that wargaming and wargaming design and the execution of wargaming and how we are doing it is very like rugby. I've been a rugby player, and up till the age of 50, when I broke too many bits and the guy in the operating room said, nah, you really shouldn't do this anymore. And so now I'm a referee. And for those of you who don't know anything about rugby, this is a Venn diagram of the world. There are rugby players, fans, officials, and supporters. And then there is the other group of people in the world who are sad, boring people who don't understand what rugby is about. But I'm going to try and use that throughout this sort of quick 10 minutes to say just how some of the analogies between a very good sport and a good war game can maybe match up. So what's a good war game and what's a good rugby game? Well, there's action and reaction between adversaries, a number of different adversaries, not just one. There's realistic representation of time, distance, and they are in an operating environment. And in rugby, the operating environment is the pitch, but it also has the weather and the wind and the light and the lights and all this sort of stuff. So it's very similar in some ways to a good war game, which is trying to represent this. It represents the capabilities and limitations of the forces and the assets, a war game does. And there are many forces and assets in a rugby game as well. Big guys, small guys, fast guys, slow guys, and so on and so forth. And we're trying in a war game to present the realistic outcomes of actions and activities. That's really at the heart of it. And it's not always military, of course, but that's our job, to represent the military stuff as well as we can. Realistic situational awareness, bluff and deception, and a way of evaluating whether or not your plan and strategy survives contact with the enemy and gets to the end that you're after. One of the things I'm going to talk about very quickly is that most war games really give lip service to this list. And we are really trying to concentrate on designing war games which capture this, but it also has to be good for the customer. I thought it was really interesting yesterday when Colonel Tim Barrett was talking about the fact that, if you were just designing a war game for war gamers, it would look completely different to what the audience is and who your customer is. So for the customer, it has to be good quality, on time, in budget, obviously, but it has to meet the needs of the customer. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. And obviously, we're looking at operating environments where Canada has a common NATO commitment. So the Arctic is one of them, for example. Here's the Northern Fleet boys, the Russians who command the Northern Fleet in Russia. And just to remind everybody that Russia has been doing wargaming, naval wargaming, since the late 1880s, and they haven't stopped. And I know Stephen Downes Martin has been doing some very interesting research into that, but they haven't stopped doing it. So you can imagine these three dudes are saying to somebody in their organization, give me a war game that tells me about what we should do in the Arctic. So we, however, because we're small, we have to be small, agile, and customer focused. We can't afford to be messing around on other stuff. And my personal opinion is that is better in some ways than being fat and slow and following perhaps old scripts, which are perhaps not now, relevant to the situation that we've got. And I quote here Frederick the Great, who said that what distinguishes man from beasts of burden, a mule you could have on 10 campaigns, but it wouldn't improve his tactics. And so what we're trying to do here in our wargaming, the wargaming that we're designing, the wargames that we're designing, that we're running, is to be small, agile, and really get people to combine ideas to be able to achieve the objective for our customer. So it's this. It looks like this. Our wargaming looks like this: fast, agile, quick on its feet, and not like this. Now, what's the major difference between this and this? Well, for a start, playtime. In a rugby game, in an 80-minute rugby game, by the way, this is Antoine Dupont, who's the French scrum half, probably the best player in the world right now. Players are running, tackling, kicking, making decisions for about 75% of that 80 minutes. Okay, so they're actually doing something, they're enacting the activities and making decisions and seeing the outcome of those decisions for about 75%. In a football game, which can last about 3 hours elapsed, the actual time of playing is 11 minutes. There's so much dead time. There's so much everybody standing around going, what are we going to do next? Let's get everybody lined up. Let's have some advertisements and so on and so forth. And for a baseball game, it's about the same. The guy in the bottom right-hand side is watching the World Series. No, he isn't. So our war games are hopefully more like a rugby game and less like a baseball game or an American football game. And I'm going to quickly run through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ethos that we have in the section as to how we think that we're able to do that, even if we're not quite as big or as well equipped or as manned up, if you like, as some of our colleagues in some of the other countries. First of all, one at 12 o'clock, we are, as far as I'm aware, pretty much the only really joint wargaming section, because we're part of the Joint Warfare Center. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's an all arms and services center. It has Army, Navy, and Air Force personnel. It has special forces guys and space. We happen to be co-located the same as the space in mob in Canada, and electronic warfare expertise. On top of that, quite literally within arm's reach, we have CORA and DRDC, which are defense boffins, scientists. So just as in rugby, you've got a whole bunch of different players that bring different skills and attributes. When we are actually designing war games, I can quite literally reach out and go to the space guys and say, is this right? And whether or not it's game design, data checking, play testers. You know, when we needed some play testers for a game last year, we said, we need some people who've got Navy expertise, Air Force expertise, somebody who knows about electronic warfare, and some logistics. Within quite literally 2 days, we had 15 or 20 people who we could, voluntold to actually help design and play test our game. So this is a major advantage for us. And as far as I'm aware, we're one of the few wargaming centers that actually has that capability, by dint of where, very cleverly, Canada decided to put their wargaming center. The second thing is agility. And I mean agile by the way we're designing games, as well as the speed at which we're doing it. We're generally being asked to act as a sort of QRF for our operational units and operational headquarters. And Scott didn't get a chance to cover it yesterday because, and some of this is classified, but the fastest game we have done was in 16 hours from being told, oh, by the way, we want you to do something, to actually executing it. While we were doing it, while we were doing the design, cruise missiles were actually flying into the AO of the place that we were setting the game up to give course of action analysis. And we actually had people in bunkers while we were actually designing the game in order to be able to come up with a course of action for the headquarters. So agility, speed, and focus. Here's the problem. Design us a game or pick up something that you've already pre-designed it and alter it so that we can have a look at this problem right now. And that's, I think, is slightly different to some of the slightly longer timescale stuff that we've seen as we're going, you know, in other countries. How can we do this? Well, obviously, it depends on the scale. You know, is it low-level tactical up to high operational? You know, how accurate do you want it to be? If you want it in 16 hours, our accuracy is going to be commensurate with that, even though we can, you know, we've got a whole bunch of researchers that we can call on. The scope, do you want to represent whole of government, just the military, a little bit of politics or dimes? Somebody was talking about that yesterday. We've got some games that have used that. And the bottom right-hand corner is a little bit weird. I was trying to think of a word that would cover it, but unusuality. How off the wall is the game that you want us to design, or is it something and run, or is it something that we, you know, may have already got a bit of a head start on? We are and have to be collaborative, not only across domains, but also across the Five Eyes primarily, and occasionally with other countries like Holland and you know, Sweden and Germany, where we've actually had interaction as well. Multinational teams in rugby take their best players and their best ideas from all over the world. It breaks my heart to say it, but the England rugby coach is Australian. The Irish rugby coach is British. The French defense coach is British. So you take good ideas and good people and collaboration in sport. So we should be doing the same in wargaming. So we're in active discussions and collaboration with the Marine Corps, the Army War College. We talk and are talking to NATO, the US Navy, US Air Force. I've designed games for the Air Force before. And we're just starting to collaborate a little bit more with the UK and obviously with Australia. We actually don't have the assets to be able to do everything, but we can be quite good at certain areas, and we bring a fresh look to other areas as well, with the Canadian perspective. So we're trying to be collaborative. It's a win-win, and we think it enhances wargaming as we go along. We're agnostic. Why? Because we have to be, because when our customer comes to us and says, we want this, what we might have available may or may not fit the bill. So we're agnostic in terms of delivery methods, we're agnostic in terms of design, and we're agnostic in terms of mechanics. We're not tied to any particular sim software or analog system, but we obviously have access to a whole bunch of different options. And of course, depending on how long you've been doing this for, I've been doing this for a long time, you know, you have a large collection, not just physically, a large collection, but a large mental collection of ways of skinning the cat. We've done distributed wargaming if required, and it has been used as needed. It has worked very well when we've done it, but generally speaking, it's much better. And I'm sure everybody will agree, once this COVID thing is finished in about 6 weeks, I think it's going to be a lot better to go back to people around a table or groups of people around a table, but we're still going to be able to do it in order to cut costs and save money by getting people in. So we're looking at that. We lean towards data-driven games and analysis. We use less debate-based adjudication like matrix gaming and so on and so forth. not because we don't think it works. It does work for some things, but mainly when we've used it, we want to quickly and efficiently use the SMEs in the game to do debate-based adjudication. Not us, not us. We should not be doing adjudication. If you're going to use matrix gaming, then use the SMEs in the audience. If you haven't got SMEs in the audience, then don't do it. Otherwise, it gets silly. Last but not least, we are neutral ground where games can be hosted, and this helps to prevent bias. The Joint Warfare Center is exactly that. We're not in the Army Training Center, we're not in the Navy Training Center. So when people come to us, that helps to a certain extent. I'll throw this picture up for two reasons. One is that because we're agnostic, we can take any system and build something up. This was a game, and I put it up because I think it's beautiful to see the players. Look at the players' concentration in this. On the left-hand side of the screen, you've got John Jeffrey, one of our team. On the right-hand side, looking as though he's about to tell the players that they're not doing the right thing, is my boss, Scott Roach, on the right there. And just hidden behind John on the left is actually Murray Dixon from DRDC, one of Ben's colleagues, who, you know, because he's a scientist, he has his book open and he's making notes. But what is this about? This is about a game that we were asked to do at less than a week's notice, and it was about logistics. And it was about logistics in a hostile environment. And we took data from the Iraqi invasion. We took data from after action reports of all of the American units that were involved in the invasion of Iraq. We took the system from a logistics game that I had designed for Ford Motor Company. And we took the order of battle and the scenario from a previous Matrix game, which Ben and Murray had run. So the whole point about this is that we took a lot of stuff, crammed it all together, and it was actually very successful. And the two other pictures at the top here, this Nagorno-Karabakh and this one here about sea control and denial, show that we can, if we need to. We did a Nagorno-Karabakh outline game in probably about a week, and we were ready to run that depending on what was happening. In terms of data capture, here is, again, the analogy, if I can very quickly, the same between sport and wargaming. Bottom left-hand side, individual stats for Antoine Dupont. You know, rugby teams monitor all of their players using body trackers, actually. It tells you how many meters they ran, whether or not they dodged a tackle, with success rate for scrums and lineouts and all this sort of stuff. Data capture, if you have it and can use it, is really often what you're trying to do at the end of the game. And some of these examples on here are ones that Brianna developed and that we used in various games. And the one at the bottom is particularly interesting, I think. Here is the problems that the game brought out: missing and unclear instructions. Most of those were C2 problems. Failure to pass information, that was more a comms issue. Coordinating, logistics in missing capability. One of the things that it's only worthwhile us doing a war game if at the end of it our customer can look at this and say, okay, what happened and why did it happen and what is that going to teach us about the operation or the choices or the decisions that we made. Otherwise, it's pointless. You would never have any sporting event if you didn't know what the result was. Measurable result. Last but not least, we match the solution to the tasking. Because we've got smaller budgets and resources, we have to be lean and selective, and we can't afford to be just working on stuff that might be interesting. So we're anticipating the next tasking, so we can be quick and ready when our customer, who's the Joint Operations Command and others, can say to us, give us a war game on this. The downside of that is that we are using our, if you like, in-service intelligence and scanning to anticipate the games we'll be asked to undertake, and we can sometimes get it wrong. And Scott mentioned it yesterday. One of the things that we're going to do to try and alleviate this as a problem is we're going to be running some wargaming courses for all of the CAF and Canadian Armed Forces and other government departments, so that people who come on those courses know what a war game is and what it isn't, and what we can do and what we can't do. And our idea is basically that we're, to an extent, we're shaping customer demand by having those people in the various headquarters and units and locations, so that they can say, a war game would be good for this, and no, you really honestly don't want a war game for that. So that's a very, very, very quick whip through of almost, to a certain extent, our ethos as the war game section at the Joint Operations Centre. And I'd finish off. I know we haven't got time for questions. There's my email addresses if anybody wants to ask any questions. And Scott, I think, has put the same ones up yesterday for him. I'll finish by showing a very quick clip. It's less than 1 minute, Ben. I hope I'm still on time. Of Antoine Dupont, the best rugby player in the world last year. And that, I would propose, is what a good war game should look like.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I can see from a lot of conversations going on in the chat here that that Connections North next year will feature an entire panel discussing the merits of rugby, or at least explaining the rules to everybody from non-rugby playing countries. So excellent, thank you very much indeed. An interesting analogy that certainly sparked a lot of people into a lot of creative thinking, which is the whole purpose of the exercise. So I think we're still missing Lieutenant Colonel Ronnie Michel from Germany. So so we'll step along to Sue Collins from NATO High Command Transformation in Norfolk. Sue, are you ready to go?
I am ready. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ben. So I don't have any nice slides today. You'll just have to look at me and listen to me instead. But you might be pleased to know I don't have any analogies about rugby or cricket or football either. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we do here at NATO and what our role is, and how it relates to the small defence communities. Okay, so I work for NATO's Allied Command Transformation. We like to think of ourselves as the Warfare Development Command for NATO. We're a strategic level command, and our role is to continuously look to the future, look out 20, 30 years in the future, look at future trends, look at future capabilities, and continuously transform NATO to maintain its capability and relevance out to the future. So that's not as easy as it sounds, because NATO takes a lot of time to change, and we need to start early if we want to have any influence about what's going to happen over the next 10, 15 years. So my role in NATO, I'm a senior operations research analyst. I conduct a lot of analytical studies, and my team conducts a lot of analytical studies, often on very difficult problems. We call them wicked problems, things that have no easy answers. And we see wargaming, and we use wargaming as a method, as a tool to help us explore some of these problems and tackle them and come up with solutions. And and answer any kind of analytical questions we have or conceptual questions. So I'm from a single NATO command. I think most of you know this, but obviously NATO has many different headquarters, a lot in Europe. I'm based in Norfolk, Virginia. And we kind of operate semi-independently over different headquarters, but we do work very closely together and for a common goal, obviously. So across all the different headquarters, we do have different levels of wargaming capability. From what I understand, talking to my colleagues in the other headquarters, everyone is interested in developing and improving our wargaming capability, but we're all starting from a different baseline and we're all trying to improve together. So like David, when Ben asked me to talk on a panel for small defence communities, I wasn't really sure because I don't really feel like I'm part of a small defence community. I feel like I'm actually part of a very, very large defence community. But I thought about it some more, and after the second or third time of asking, I was like, well, I mean, we're actually quite a small analyst community in NATO. We have a relatively small number of professional analysts. We have a much smaller number of experienced wargamers or experienced wargame designers. The number of experienced adjudicators we have within NATO is very small as well. So it's something which we have room to grow our experience in that area. But I think what's probably more important and more interesting for this panel is our role. And our role is really, and one of our strengths, I would say, is to bring small defence communities together. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So what kind of games do we run? Well, like I said, we do have some experience. We have lots of experience in what we call experimentation, employing scientific principles to analytical questions, to conceptual questions. We've been doing that for a number of years. We have been employing game-like methods for a number of years. We didn't always call them wargaming, but we did call them assessment games or technology games, that kind of thing, where we have rules and we have teams. So very similar to wargaming. Wargaming as a term wasn't talked about much in my career until about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's become much more popular over the last few years. I put that down, 80–90% of that is because of these connections communities, the push from the UK, from Canada, from America, to kind of bring back the resurgence in popularity in wargaming. So the kind of games we do in my command, mostly we focus at the strategic level for wargaming. We occasionally go up to the political level, sometimes down to operational. Rarely in my command we go down to the tactical level because we're a strategic level command. So we often think about whole campaigns, whole regions. We do look at the dime aspects, the political aspects. It's more than just moving military counters on a board. Examples of some games we've done recently. There was a game on the NATO military strategy. That was a very political level game. There was a distributed game on disruptive technology for policymakers. We've looked at nuclear gaming. We've also looked at games to test out future concepts, so future ideas of how NATO and nations can operate. So how we might operate in naval mine warfare, how we might operate on joint urban operations, how we consider protection of civilians. Just some examples of games that we've done over the last 5 or 6 years. And like I mentioned, we lead a lot of analytical studies. We use wargaming to answer specific analytical questions. For example, what capabilities do we require to operate in a A2AD anti-access area denial environment? It's a very specific question with a, unfortunately, very complicated answer. In terms of our wargaming resources, something we're really good at, and I don't know how nations can do this so much, but our unique ability, because we're an international organisation, we tend to borrow other people's resources a lot. Our games are very international for lots of nationalities in a single game. So we have the ability to borrow analysts from defence, government departments in the nations. We have the ability to borrow simulation models. For example, the US are running their simulation model for a war game we're designing this year, and they've done that in the past as well. And we even ask nations to host war games on our behalf. We'll phone up someone who's got a nice wargaming centre and say, hey, can we come and use it for a week? So that kind of works really well. But in order to borrow other people's resources, we obviously have to provide some of our own. We need the core capability within our own organisation. So in terms of what we're good at, I think we're really good at connecting people. NATO in general, we connect all the nations together. An example of this, the NATO Science and Technology Organisation, they sponsor a load of research activities. Not all of them to do with wargaming, but some are. And for example, I'm chair of a research activity right now, which is looking at advancing analytical wargaming in NATO. And it's made up of people from many different NATO countries and partner countries. There's a new research activity looking at distributed wargaming. And again, the idea is to borrow one person from 10 or 12 different countries to bring everyone together to share the expertise. And that's if you do belong to a small defence community, NATO is a good way of getting wargaming experience or connecting to others, or sharing your methods, your ideas, and learning from each other. So what kind of things do we struggle with? I've mentioned kind of the numbers of people with a deep experience. I say we have a lot of people with some experience of wargaming, but not the real depth person who's been doing it for 20 or 30 years. We have quite a high turnover. A lot of our command is military, and they don't get time to spend 20 years just on one single subject like wargaming. Right now, we struggle with a lack of in-house software for wargaming, especially when it comes to classified games. I obviously can't talk too much about the kind of games we do on a classified level, but just know when we've taken up to a classified level, we don't have the open source software on the internet that we can use, and we have communications capability, but not a lot else to play these really complicated games. And that's something which we'd like to improve on in the future. So talking about the future, we've recently released something called the NATO Warfighting Capstone concept. So this is a concept recently signed by my 4-star SAP-T, and it's kind of an overarching concept for NATO. It relates to the broader NATO military strategy, and it's kind of a concept of how we're going to do our warfare development into the future. What's interesting about this for the war gaming community, as part of operationalizing this Capstone concept, there's a number of initiatives. There's many different ones, and one of them is related to wargaming. So it's interesting to me that even at the very high leadership levels, they're starting to get interested in wargaming and they want to push it forward. So we have this new initiative called Audacious Wargaming. It's basically where we really want to institutionalize wargaming in NATO and create a culture where it's safe to take like bold risks in a safe to fail environment, or it's safe to explore lots of options. Previously in NATO, we've often tied to political guidelines and for very, very good reasons. There's constraints on us that way, but through wargaming, we want to push the boundaries and create this culture where we use it. It's just part of day-to-day use. So how are we going to operationalize this new concept of audacious wargaming? So we obviously want to improve our capabilities, as everyone wants to. we would like to create some sort of hub and spoke model where ACT is kind of a hub for the NATO wargaming community, and we connect to all the spokes, and the spokes would be in the NATO nations, in partner nations, in various organizations, where we can really help bring people together and help each other. And so we consider, so no matter how small your nation is, or no matter how small your community is, if you're just one analyst in a nation or just one person who's interested in wargaming, as long as you're a nationality that's a NATO country or a partner of NATO, you'd be welcome to participate, because we really feel like the whole is greater than the sum of individual parts, and we'd like to help smaller countries as equally, drawing on the larger countries and drawing from their experience. So kind of to summarize all of that, we're trying to create a kind of a culture of persistent and pervasive wargaming in all elements of what we do. And I'll leave it there, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sue. So thank you very much to all of our presenters. That's a very sort of an interesting set of different takes on the challenge.